Thank you much for being here. We appreciate your presence. Man, we just had a great vacation Bible school. If you missed it, you missed a treat. If the only good that was done during our vacation Bible school was the adult class, then man, it was wonderful. Those lessons, every one of them, were great. Now, next year, Mike and Vicki will be heading up Vacation Bible School. So if you got any suggestion for themes, let them know. We've already been working on it. I suggested a few. And you've got to keep the little ones in mind to be able to reach them. So it's a task to do it and do it right. So help us out. Mike and Vicki will do a great job, I'm sure. So we do appreciate it. Bill and Rhonda Haywood are here. And they'll be coming here. And that's wonderful. Except when Bill is out of town, he is the director of the Tri-City School of Preaching and Christian Development. And he'll be traveling quite a bit, trying his best to secure students like Andy, that we're very proud to have, and some others that will be coming, Lord willing, in August. Now, we're studying the book of Daniel, and we're in Daniel chapter 5, the handwriting on the wall. How many times have you heard someone say when someone did something stupid, buddy, the handwriting's on the wall for him? That means he's fixing to lose. He did the wrong thing, and Belshazzar did that, as we shall see in this chapter. So Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Now, this kind of starts out maybe as a feast, a drunken feast, but it's going to turn into a religious drunken feast, where Belshazzar is going to try to honor the gods of various things, and in the process insult the true and living God. Well, you can't do that and get by with it. And by the way, you see some things happening here which God warned Israel about when it came to selecting a king. See, they wanted a king, like all the nations round about them. God said, well, okay, that's what you want, but they're going to take your women for wives, plural. They're going to tax you tremendously for gold and silver, and they're going to live an extravagant lifestyle. And that's exactly what's happening here with Belshazzar. Can you imagine the cost of a feast that's going to take care of just 1,000 people? A tremendous cost. And yet Belshazzar don't care. He is well off because Babylon is well off, and Babylon is secure, and he's tickled to death to be the king. Now, when I say he's the king, there's a co-regency here, or co-reigning with his father. And we'll see that in a moment. And a lot of people have trouble with Belshazzar being said to be the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Well, that's the way the language was employed back then, and even in the Bible. You know, the people in the New Testament said, we are of our father Abraham. See, they use language like that to refer to someone in the past that they wanted to follow and so forth. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. And the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. Now this thing has become a religious feast to a large degree. And Belshazzar decides he's going to insult the God that was over in Jerusalem, that ruled the children of Israel. Now, the southern kingdom is in captivity at Babylon. So he says, I want you to go get those golden and silver vessels that my father Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple in Jerusalem. And we're going to drink out of them. Well, that's what they did. They drank out of them, insulting the true and living God. And they praised at the same time the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. Now, God Almighty is seeing all this, and he's highly displeased with what they're doing. Here they are, number one, drinking, getting drunk. Number two, insulting him by taking the very vessels that were used to love and serve him to be involved in this drunken feast. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Now, what would you think right now, while I'm speaking to you, if you see about this much, just a hand, writing on these walls? Would that get your attention? It'd get my attention. You know, we talk about how God, who in divers manners and sundry ways and days gone by spake unto the fathers by the prophets. Well, he spake in various ways. He used a donkey one time. He spoke out of a bush. He even used old Nebuchadnezzar to receive a couple of dreams and them being interpreted. And now, the handwriting on the wall. So this would get your attention and mine, I promise you. Verse 6, then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. Now, you know somewhat how that feels when you gave your first book report in school, and you were up there, and your knees knocking and hitting each other, and if they missed each other, you'd have probably fallen flat of your face. I would have. That's how nervous I was. So now, his countenance has changed. He's no longer at this happy-go-lucky party. He is concerned about what does that mean? What is going on here? His countenance has changed. He's a nervous wreck. And he wants to try to figure out what all this means. So you just imagine seeing a hand writing on a wall. Now that ought to get your attention, and it ought to get mine. And so this is a warning to Belshazzar. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof, shall be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now that's important. We'll get to that in a moment. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Why in the world could they not read the writing? Let's say it was Arabic, and that's what chapters 2 through the end of 7 is written in. Well, Arabic reads from the right to the left, number one. Number two, they drop the vowels. I started to put up something in English, reading right to left, drop the vowels, and see if you could read it. You know, it becomes a little harder. But then, when words are employed that you usually maybe don't use, that's another problem. And then a third problem is, what if it was not Arabic? You know, what is this written in? Anyway, we know what the words are. We'll see the words in a moment. But he's called for the wise men. And the wise men have come, and they can't read it. Well, we've noticed lately in chapter 4, they couldn't figure out Nebuchadnezzar's dream and give the interpretation thereof. And I think one reason they couldn't there is because of the great lie detector. Daniel was there, and Nebuchadnezzar had already used Daniel in chapter 2 to interpret that dream. And why in the world Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4 called for the wise men is beyond me. And then he told the wise men the dream. And he said in chapter 2, if I tell you the dream, you'll make up a lie. Why didn't he believe that in chapter 4? I don't know, but Daniel came in, and Daniel told him the interpretation. Now what's amazing is you'll see here, as in chapter 4, the interpretation of the dream is going to go against the king. Well, in chapter 4, if you remember, he told Nebuchadnezzar the interpretation of this dream is for your enemies and them that hate you. It's not good, Nebuchadnezzar. But you know, after Daniel gave the interpretation, Nebuchadnezzar didn't do a thing to him. Now here, after the interpretation is going to be given, and it's terrible against Belshazzar, he exalts him. You know, I don't know where he thought I got quite a bit of time before all this happens or what, but he exalted Daniel just like he said he would. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished. Now, here you got some kind of message on the wall. You bring in your wise men. They can't tell you what it means. You're a nervous wreck. You're bothered by it. And so your countenance changes if you're Belshazzar. He's a nervous wreck at this time. Now the queen. Now, I don't believe this is his wife because they were already in there. This is probably the wife of one of the queens of the rulers of Babylon before. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house. And the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. Don't let this bother you. I'm convinced there's an answer. There is a man in thy kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. Notice they cannot get away from that concept of God's plural. He's got the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar thy father, the king, I say thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. This man, I'm telling you, Nebuchadnezzar, your father, set him over all the wise men. If you remember, Nebuchadnezzar was going to kill all of them until Daniel stepped forward and gave the true interpretation. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and showing of hard sentences and the dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show you the interpretation. Call Daniel. Daniel will tell you what it means. He did it for your father, Nebuchadnezzar. He has a spirit of the gods in him that allows him to do that. Then was Daniel brought in before the king. And the king spake unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel, which are of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. This is amazing that Daniel has done what he's done in Babylon. And here you got a king that really doesn't know who he is. It took a queen to come in and say, listen, there's a man here that did great things for your father Nebuchadnezzar. He interpreted dreams, and you need to call him. And when Daniel comes, Belshazzar wants to know, are you that Daniel that was in Jerusalem? And my father brought thee here into captivity. Are you that Daniel? Yes, I am. You'd think that the wisdom of this man would be passed down year after year after year after year to every king. And Babylon would definitely know who this man is. But not so. Belshazzar don't know who he is until the queen says you need to send for him. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof, but they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I've heard of thee. Notice, I've heard of thee, that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now, if thou canst read the writing and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Daniel, if you can live up to the reputation that I've heard of thee, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to clothe thee in scarlet. I'm going to put gold around your neck. And you'll be the third ruler in this kingdom, if you can do it. Well, Daniel's not interested in the material things for several reasons. He's just not interested in the material things. Number two, he knows the interpretation of the handwriting. He knows that Babylon's not going to last long. So he wouldn't have much if he had all that. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let thy gifts be to thyself. You keep them. And give thy rewards to another. Give all that stuff to somebody else. Yet I will read the writing unto the king and make known to him the interpretation. Now, he is going to tell Belshazzar, you should have learned something from the past. If we do not learn from the past, we're prone to repeat those mistakes. And you're going to see Daniel, in essence, tell him that. Eddie Fish told his children as they were growing up, I've been down life's road a ways. I know where some of the potholes are, and I'm trying to tell you what I'm telling you so you can miss those potholes. Well, that's right. See, you and I have been down the road of life a ways. We know where some of the potholes are, and it's our God-given obligation to warn our children about the potholes. Well, same way about history. Whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning. So we need to learn from those things that are written aforetime, just like the book of Daniel. We need to learn some principles from the book of Daniel that will help us even now. So, verse 18, O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him, whom he would slew. And I misread that. Whom he would, he slew. And whom he would, he kept alive. And whom he would, he set up. Whom he would, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Now, Belshazzar, your father was given this kingdom. And he is a man of mighty power, whom he chose to slay, he slew. Those he wanted to live, he kept alive. Those he wanted in captivity, he put in captivity. He was an awesome man, except he got puffed up with pride. And because he is puffed up with pride, the kingdom was taken from him. And he was driven from the sons of men. And his heart was made like the beast. And his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen. And his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. And thou, his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all these things. You knew what happened to Belshazzar because of his pride. And look at your pride and your arrogancy. You had the audacity to go get the silver and the gold vessels that were used in the temple of the Most High God and bring them in and drink out of them wine honoring false gods. You've not chosen to humble yourself. But I'll tell you something, the God of heaven is fixing to humble you. That's what it amounts to. That's what the handwriting deals with. But has lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. That's what he did. And they have brought the vessels of his house before thee. And thou and thy lords, thy wives, and thy concubines have drunk wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know, and the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. Then was the part of the hand set from him, and this writing was written. So, that hand was sent from God, and the writing was written. Now, Belshazzar lets him know, you're serving gods that can't hear. They don't know anything. They don't breathe. They don't do anything. Now, can you imagine how dumb we human beings are, like in days gone by, when they'd whittle out, say, a gold like this and deck it out with silver and gold. And this became their God. And they carried their God around, could put their God in their pocket. In the Bible, God warns them, they can't do you any good. They can't do you any harm. They can't help you. And the day will come when I bring my vengeance down upon you, that you will call upon your gods, but they can't deliver you, and you will throw them into caves. See, this can't deliver anybody. Only the God of heaven can. So God has sent a message, whatever that message is, the handwriting upon the wall. And this is the writing that was written, many tekel upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Many. God has numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel. Thou art weighed in the balances and are found wanting. Perez. Now, the upharsin, which means divided, is now Perez, which means divided as well, but has a similar ringing to the Persians. The kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Now, anytime you study the Medes and the Persians in the Bible, like when we get to chapter 7, and the bear will be higher on one side than the other, because the Persian side was stronger than the Medo side. And the same way when you come to chapter 8, and the he-goat hits the ram. Well, the ram has one horn that is longer than the other. And that's because of Persia. Now, what's happening here, which is not brought out necessarily, but is a wonderful thing for the children of Israel, because it's going to bring forth a king that was prophesied, and that was Cyrus. And Cyrus is going to let the children of Israel go home. And he's going to help them. So this is a great thing for the children of Israel, though it's not pointed out right here. But it truly is. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. Isn't that something? Here's a man that gives the interpretation of a handwriting, and it's totally against the king. Man, you've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom is going to be taken from you, in essence. And he says, I'm going to do what I promised I'd do. I'm going to reward the man that could give the interpretation. Now, when you think about Belshazzar, and the critics have hollered, hey, this is wrong because it keeps saying that Nebuchadnezzar is his father. Well, Nebuchadnezzar was his father. Nabonidus was his father. And he reigned with his father. Nabonidus, according to secular history, was fighting Cyrus during the time that all of this was taking place. And he was losing and was going to lose. Now, the whosoever that's going to be the third in the kingdom as far as ruling would be the one that could interpret the handwriting. Well, that happens to be Daniel. But it's not going to amount to much. Now, many in this handwriting meant God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. It's over. Your kingdom is over. You can forget it. Tickle, thou art weighed in the balances and are found wanting. God's weighed you and the way you rule, and you've been found wanting, and God is not pleased with your leadership at all. Upharsin, which was also used Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Now, we told you we're dealing with 4 world empires in the book of Daniel. 3 of them are mentioned by name. Only one is not mentioned, and that is the Roman Empire. But we know that it has to be the 4th one because it followed the Grecian. You have Babylon, you have the Medo-Persian, the Grecian, and the Roman. Those 4 empires. Well, in that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. In that night, the man died. God said his kingdom was finished. And God meant it. Now, here is a verse that has given trouble to some because Cyrus and Darius are going to be co-regents or reign together at the same time. But Darius is going to take up his leadership 3 years after Cyrus. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old, 62 years old. So that is Daniel chapter 5. Questions or comments from anybody? Ken, you look like you want to ask something.
I was just going to say Daniel's come a long way from the lion's den.
He sure has. Well, he's fixing to get in the lion's den next week. Yeah. I mean, this is a great book. But again, what was the problem? Pride and arrogancy. And God will not tolerate it. And some of the verses that we employed last week to show that one cannot be prideful and be pleasing to God. In Proverbs 11:2, when pride cometh, then cometh shame, but with the lowly is wisdom. All right, David. Not that I know of. Could be. But you are right. It's going from the greatest to the least, it seems like. But I don't know of any significance per se. And it could be that Daniel, in writing this, is trying to say, you put your faith up here and something can't help you, and you just went downhill. And it couldn't help you either. But that's a good question. Anybody else? All right, we'll quit just a couple of minutes early. Thank you.